I'm really excited to get into this topic. We have such a good panel here. I'm not going to read their whole bios, but I will just kind of briefly say who they are. Eli Dvorkin is my partner in crime at the Center for an Urban Future, our policy director at CUF. Kelsey Louie leads The Door. Leslie Abbey is the head of Hot Bread Kitchen, and Rachel Cato is with the Lower East Side Employment Network. Thrilled to have them. Please join me in welcoming them. So Eli, you oversaw this research we did at the Center for an Urban Future about wraparound supports. Tell us what some of the big takeaways are.
Yeah, thanks, John. Well, I will say it won't come as a surprise to any of the providers in this room that our #1 takeaway was that wraparound services are absolutely essential for making workforce development programs more inclusive and more effective, helping more New Yorkers who otherwise might have barriers for even enrolling in a program to get in the first place, and to be able to persist in a program and complete and ultimately get a job on the other side. But there's a couple of other takeaways that really jumped out at me. I think one was that it's almost sort of perverse when we looked at the landscape of workforce development organizations and the services they are able to provide, in that when NYC ETC has surveyed providers in the past, they have reported that the very supports that they see as most effective, most needed, are the ones that they're least likely to be able to provide. And that was corroborated time and again in our research. It was childcare for folks who are working parents. It was transportation costs, the cost of getting to and from training and other things you need to do in a day. And it was a stipend. And it's actually underscores why we titled our report, The High Cost of Free Job Training. Because while policymakers understand we are so lucky as a city to benefit from this incredible kaleidoscope of different career development and job training organizations that really work, and frankly, other cities around the world look at New York as a leading model. They say, you guys have the programs that really work. But what we found in our report is that too often those programs aren't delivering the full potential of their impact because folks just don't have the ability to provide those supports on a consistent basis. So what do we mean by that? Well, we found, for instance, in our research that only 3 providers that we surveyed out of nearly 30 are able to offer childcare supports today. It wasn't much better when it came to transportation subsidies. That was about 10 of those providers. So, across the board, we saw, there was a real understanding that those supports are often make or break for their participants. The reason why you're able to say, I can afford to participate in a free training program, but a free program that's full-time for 8 weeks or 16 weeks. That means that how am I supposed to then also take care of my child, my parents, to work, 2 or 3 other jobs to bring in some income, even though you're not charging tuition for this program. And I guess my other takeaway was, I think while everyone in the room that's a provider understands this, it really struck me throughout the research that a lot of policymakers in New York City aren't aware of this. And I'll say one thing about that, which is, however, it's not a mystery to some policymakers that wraparound services are important. And I would just cite the incredible success of the CUNY ASAP and ACE programs at CUNY. Now, these programs offer many of the same supports that we're talking about today for workforce programs. They provide a free Metro card or now an Omni card. They offer one-on-one counseling, a much lower ratio of advisors to students than are typical at CUNY. And they offer supports from some other non-tuition costs like textbooks and technology costs. And these programs have become leading national models, renowned across the country as the most effective drivers of college success that we've got in the United States. And we pioneered that right here in New York City, not only at CUNY, but in fact through key seed investments that the city made. But when I talk to policymakers about doing the same thing for workforce programs, they're unfamiliar with the idea. They didn't really understand there's the same gaps in terms of the non-tuition costs that all too often derail folks who are pursuing a better life and a better job through training, the same barriers that we've been able to successfully knock down in many cases at CUNY. So it struck me that we really need to elevate this opportunity for policymakers, or we're gonna see that the limited dollars that we do have for workforce development, they just don't go far enough.
That's great. Thanks, Eli. I'm going to come back to you with some of the kind of causes and kind of next steps. But let me turn to our other panelists and kind of get their experiences with wraparound supports. Now, we are going to get to kind of what more is needed, what the city can do. But let me start with Leslie, because you have offered some supports for quite a while now. What are you seeing? What does it make a difference?
Yes. So Hot Bread Kitchen has really, even from before my time, has been designed as a very holistic program, but we have really grown it. And so we do provide Metro cards, we provide stipends, we provide emergency funds, we provide case management. And I'd say that that has only gotten even more robust, and we see it as even further like a driver of success in our programs. I think of we call our participants members. Our members are essentially in school and they're looking to work, and so they need some income to be covering expenses while they're with us in the in our free training. And so it's absolutely essential that we provide those stipends. When I first started, because mostly we were serving really only women at the time. Now we have some gender inclusive programming too. Our program had been designed to provide stipends only for childcare, and just somewhat giving sort of my more social service background, I said, let's open that up and say we're going to just give a stipend in cash. Our members know how to use it best. If they need it for childcare, great. If they need it for something else like food, whatever, great. Like, let's not sort of dictate how they're going to use the stipends. And so ever since basically early 2022, we now provide it just as cash. And I was explaining to you also that we do this, and as our organization has grown, and we now this year have enrolled 750 members in Hot Break Kitchen's programs, we can't be handing out like gift cards or cash. So how do you do that at that scale? It's nothing to do it. So we do it through ACHs, which then requires that all of our members be banked, which is a good thing, I think, unto itself. And so if they're not banked already, we'll help them do that to get that ready.
And have you seen any differences in enrollment, retention through the offering of these services based on what it was like before?
As I mentioned, it was here before, but there's, honestly, countless examples of times where we saw some of our members about to drop out, and we kind of come in with supports. The stipends kind of are just there, so it's a little hard for me to do a pre and post stipend. But we do provide emergency funds, and those have gone to things like covering the cost of childcare that just gets lost immediately while we figure out a plan. Any kind of bridge costs that are needed while our case managers can kind of solve for a longer term solution, will come in for that. And I'll just say, I feel so strongly about Hot Break Kitchen and our organization doing this holistic support. I personally welcome every single cohort of training, and this past year we had 28 cohorts of training, so I come in and welcome them. And the two things I talk to them about are, number one is sometimes I want to let them know that I'm coming around sometimes with a funder, and I want to make sure they understand what my job is and like why it is we have champions of our work come around with me. But the second thing that I always focus on is to let them know directly from me that we are here on their journey with us and also after us. We say once a member, always a member of Hot Break Kitchen, and that we have resourced our organization to provide stipends, Metro cards, emergency funding, and other kinds of support. So I'm very, very bullish about the fact that there is absolutely no way that our programs could be as successful as they are without this kind of the support.
Great. Kelsey, you were telling me earlier that the Door is kind of like the definition of an organization doing wraparound supports. What's your experience with them?
Yeah, so one, I just want to make sure that I make the point clear that wraparound services are absolutely essential. And at the Door, we're fortunate that we are able to offer a full continuum of wraparound support. However, I like to think about these supports that are needed to help young people survive in a workforce setting in three different ways. There's the concrete services like transportation costs, food, childcare. Then there are additional services like mental health services or even housing. And then the third is how we do the work. So providing, let's say, navigation work to help people explore and to go through the process. It's not just enough to assign someone to a training, hope that they succeed, because while the training matters and is important, it really is all the other supports that make that success possible. And there are a number of examples where I've seen young people struggle to stay in training programs because they didn't have the right supports. And when added, they were able to succeed. But the difference is, at the Door, we're fortunate that we are a large organization that has been around for over 50 years that offers these services, not just for our young people in workforce. And so for organization, what I think needs to happen, I know you're going to get to this later, but this idea that these services and supports need to be embedded in the workforce contracts.
Thank you, Kelsey and Rachel. What's your experience with workforce supports?
Hi, everybody. So I am the partnership director for the Lower East Side Employment Network, known as LESSON. That includes 6 workforce development or partners that have workforce development contracts or some sort of funded program, and another 3 that we consider to be resource partners to provide a lot of the wraparound support. So imagine we're working as a collective model, a collaborative model, and even in that space where we have even the door is a part of this, where they support youth. Henry Street supports anyone between 18 and until you can't work any longer, and then even still in their other programs. And we still have to reach out to each other's programs to support and to cover the gaps that exist. And so I think that lends itself back to saying that, yes, of course, wraparound services are needed, right? We all benefit from social services, every single one of us, no matter how much money that you have or don't have. And with that in mind, those who are a part of these contracts, let's say, for example, anyone who's familiar with the train and earn contract, while that can be very beneficial, what they're asking for you to do is support people who have the most needs possible. And then the dollars that are provided are not provided for infrastructure build. And so then you are running and creating as you're existing. I'm talking to the providers in the room. And then you don't have a chance to develop institutional knowledge. You don't have a chance to develop the foundations that you really, really, really need in order to make these programs as efficient as possible. And so because you can't focus there, your wraparound support funding ends up going to your infrastructure funding, or the attention goes there. And so I would agree with Kelsey by saying, I think it does have to do with the contracting level. The equation that we're trying to solve for is, what we're solving for is connecting talent to positions, right? With employers who are willing to, at the very least, interview. And we can't do that if the funding doesn't support the rest of the equation, if we are missing and we have gaps in our process. And the people who hurt the most are those who are looking for employment. Something has to change.
Hear, hear. I want to get into the contracts in a second, but can you all establish, and Kelsey, maybe start with you, just like most of you embrace wraparound services, you understand how important it is, you see it on the ground. Most of you are in some ways offering those kind of supports and services, but are we right? Is our report right that not everybody's able to do this consistently?
Oh, absolutely. I think this is a systemic problem, and I often say that systemic problems require systemic solutions. We also need to innovate. And I think when we think about innovation, we often think about something really complex and new that we've never heard of, but sometimes innovation means talking to the people who are receiving the services and finding out from them directly what they need, and looking at the information and the data to say, how can we enhance what we're doing? And I want to take an opportunity to talk about one of these innovations that seems very basic, which is this idea that these training programs are great. And what happens is we rush to put people in them because we have to meet our deliverables for our contracts. Sorry, I'm going back to contracts again. And what ends up happening is we put people in programs and we don't take the time to really think about what they need, what they want. And it's a parallel conversation to wraparound services. Before you offer anybody wraparound support, you need to assess what they need and take the time to figure out what are the right supports for them. Similarly, I think we need to think about what training programs are most appropriate for young people, and maybe they might not know. And I think we need to take the time, and I think everyone here probably knows Katie Napolitano, who is leading this project with The Door and many others, to really think about how we can serve New York City youth better by offering time for this exploration, and as Rachel mentioned, adding this idea of collaborating throughout the city to create a systemic solution for this systemic problem. And again, collaboration is innovation.
It's great. It's so great to hear about the innovation you're doing. What are some of the other kind of problems with the contracting process that we need to get to through innovations like that, through other things? Like, Rachel, maybe we'll start with you. Just like, help me understand, like, what's not happening in the contracting process, or what's not included that makes it hard for organizations to offer these consistently?
Space. You guys are choked with the amount of requirements that your money allows for you to do. I don't believe that you in this room do not know what your constituents need, what your members need. I think you know them very, very well. And I don't think that we would need to survey them again to figure out what kind of job they may want. You guys have employment coordinators who are speaking directly to these members every single day. You build and do intakes with all of the information needed. And I think if we consider the fact that nonprofits are in not the best relationship with city government, city contracts, or philanthropy as a whole, right? We're not, the equation is imbalanced. And so if you guys are always at the end of the rope trying to rob Peter to pay Paul to just keep your doors open while helping people, then the contract that you're engaging in doesn't make sense. And if it's the city government who is utilizing your services and your expertise and your know-how in order to help people, right? They're using you. They could do it themselves. They could just hire you into the city and structure it and do it themselves, but they don't, which is fine. I understand. I love that because it's a neighborhood idea, right? You know who's in your area. And so if we have the capacity in the contracting level to give more power of design to the organizations and then also give dollars for infrastructure build, then you wouldn't have to have a contract that hires staff to do the work. It just doesn't make any sense. If I'm a city employer, a city agency, and I say, okay, I work with UICD and I really need to find a youth program because we've heard back that something needs to happen over here. We really need, there's economic development in East New York and we really wanna, have the neighborhood to be ready, the locals to be ready to work. Why then, if you're contracting with an organization who should have the capacity to already to have those wraparound supports set up, why do you think you're giving them money to create a whole team to do this? That means something doesn't work. And so we really, really, really need to pay attention to what sort of contracts are you going into? How do they actually help your program? Do you actually need infrastructure build? And in terms of wraparound services, can you do this without digging into your own spaces and then not having enough for the other things that you need? Because wraparound services take a lot. It's not just a Metro card, right? I know all of you guys know how to get Metro cards at this point. We know how to get them. It's not Metro cards. It's not stipends, It's sometimes the time it takes to get folks ready to actually be in a workplace. And that can be 6 weeks after the 14-week training. So what do we do for that time? And then in the contracts, they ask you guys to support people who have, like I said, the highest barriers. And they put these we're trying to help people. The train and earn contract, I know for certain, says that you cannot, the people who participate, they have to be between 18 and 24, 25. They can't work. They can't be in school. You can't do anything. That doesn't make any sense. And then you want to get them into a job that it's experience entry level. So they have to have had work time. Help me put it together. It doesn't make any sense. So that's what I'm saying to all the policy folks in the room, to all the employers, something has to change, okay? It doesn't make any sense.
So Eli, you said that at the beginning that not all policymakers get this, right? So what Rachel's saying, I think probably folks in the room probably understand that pretty clearly. But for policymakers, like what did the research find about like kind of the contracting process?
Yeah, well, I do think just really quick on that first point, why there isn't that understanding. I think part of it is there hasn't been a lot of data. Our report is a contribution to that. We're trying to actually put out more data to show and really prove the value of these supports. And I do think from folks that we talked to as we were still doing the research, part of their frustration or their confusion was, well, you can't necessarily point to me to some specific set of findings that say we should be investing in this because here's what we get in return. Well, we started the process of trying to piece that together. And frankly, that is really important for shifting policy. I mean, when we saw the effect, I'll mention this again, the road to scaling up CUNY ASAP, it flowed through a really rigorous evaluation that the city actually helped to support through NYC Opportunity, that built the evidence base that showed these supports are dramatically boosting graduation rates, and ultimately led to the situation we're in now, where the city's willing to commit tens of millions of dollars a year to a program that they now know really works. Well, I will say what we studied in this report shows that the supports we're talking about, and I would actually say that things like stipends and a MetroCard are a big part of it, that those supports are boosting completion rates by upwards of 39%. When Perscolis was able to offer, through some philanthropic dollars, offer stipends to learners that typically didn't receive those stipends, it boosted completion rates by almost 20%. And they calculated that if they'd had $500,000 to be able to allocate to stipends for everyone in that program, it would have raised the first-year earnings for their graduates by over $2 million. So we're talking about more than a 4-to-1 return on investment just for stipends alone. So I think part of the challenge has been there really, up until now, hasn't been much in the way of evidence to show what every provider knows kind of intrinsically. And I think it's important to shift the conversation from only being about what's the right thing to do. I don't think there's any dissent this is the right thing to do, but to also show this is the smart, economically rational thing to do because it leads to much better outcomes. And it makes these programs more inclusive, right? So that's one piece I think has been missing, but I think we can start to move in that direction. In terms of the contracting, I mean, I completely agree with what Rachel's saying there, and Kelsey, and I think just fundamentally what a lot of folks don't realize about the way the money flows through the sector is that so many of the dollars originate from federal WIOA dollars, right? Like we are moving those dollars through the system. The dollars are capped at, a couple $1,000s for a participant. It puts providers in the situation where they're raising 15, 20, 30% or more on top of whatever they're getting from their contracts just to cover the basic costs of delivering that program for staff, for rent, to pay for their utility bills. That doesn't leave any money left over to cover wraparound services. In fact, they're doing additional private fundraising. And so in a sense, what we've built as a city is a system that is A, heavily reliant on federal money, and B, where we flow that money through to local organizations on the ground, we are expecting them to raise 50% or more of that money just to keep the lights on and to be able to deliver the basic, program while there's these outcomes-based, metrics that require more, So to me, that's part of what needs to shift. I definitely agree it's about flexibility for the providers to understand how to actually make those dollars work best for their learners, for their members. But it's also, I would argue, to actually set aside in those contracts specific dollars for wraparound services. Now, ideally, we could build the evidence base as we do that. So potentially, just like CUNY ASAP, we could launch a wraparound services pilot program that would actually build an evaluation into the additional dollars and say, we want to track the effectiveness of being able to offer stipends or MetroCards or mental health services or other things for learners that don't have that through your program today. And we'll see if those completion rates increase, if job placement rates increase, if those folks are earning more after a year than they would have otherwise, then we can build a stronger case for actually increasing investment in these sorts of supports. So those are some of the things that I think have been kind of lacking today, even though we know that they work in other contexts. But I think the numbers back it up, and ultimately we can build a stronger case going forward that these supports are essential for making those public dollars go further and have a more of an impact.
Leslie, where do you get most of your funding to cover those supports you provide right now? Is it from the private funding, or?
I mean, most of our funding, I think unlike many providers maybe in this room, is we are mostly privately funded. We have only about 15% is government funded right now. And so most of it is privately funded. But as many folks maybe in the audience even know, I've worked in many multi-service organizations, including youth development organizations, before coming to Hot Break Kitchen. And I have to say that what I've seen too, first of all, we would love to be involved in any study about this because I think it would prove itself really quickly. But what I see, it's sort of social service organizations versus workforce development. There's like a little bit of a different tenor that I have seen also, frankly, from our government partners. The idea that workforce development is sort of like a temporary, almost ephemeral moment in someone's life, like you're in school and then you're out of school, like you're getting training for 8 weeks and then you go to a job and like that's it. And what I think is sometimes our partners fail to see is the connections that we're making with our members in even those 8 weeks is so significant. It's such a significant moment in their lives, and they stay with us for the most part afterwards because the journey for their careers doesn't end the minute we place them in the first job. They need to figure out conflict resolution. They need to understand promotions. We have upskilling training, so many of our members come back to us to get more trainings. And so, and even, recently we added financial literacy. Well, we've done financial literacy training, but we've been doing it even more so. And we did a survey with our members, with partners from Columbia Business School, and the majority of our members said they would come to us for financial literacy information, not a bank, not their employer, but would come back to us for that. So when you think about the relationship, you can kind of see where this need for wraparound services just really originates, like at the beginning when they walk in with us, and then ongoing with their journey. I think this is kind of understood in those multi-service social service organizations that participants will kind of come in and come out depending on sort of what they need. Mental health services can take a very long time, so there's a long-standing relationship. But even with like a 6 or 7 week program, we are establishing these relationships that are going to go way beyond that and sort of help folks with their entire career journey. And I think that kind of speaks to the need for those services to be resourced.
So we have about 17, 18 minutes left. I really want to kind of really focus on specific solutions. And with the key word being specific, we've got a new mayor coming in, we've got a new city council speaker. There's an opportunity here. What specifically should we be putting on the table for those new officials in New York City? What should they do to make sure that, hey, we don't just have sporadic offering of wraparound supports and services, but that this becomes much more consistent and that many more organizations, that it's not just those on this room or people in the room in the audience somewhat being able to offer these things, but it is much more consistent across the sector. What are specific recommendations you'd like to put on the table for the mayor and the city council? Anybody?
I think the first thing is, and with all respect to all of the reporting that you've done, maybe considering that it's not just an investment in a program for an outcome with a number. I appreciate love and need data, but these are people that need to have a place to live. It's not, we can't equate housing with stipends. We have to understand that it's a broad range of needs. We have young people who went through COVID in high school and do not have who are lacking some basic skills that are required to get into entry-level work. So you're talking about a different training mechanism with a different level of understanding. That's a wraparound service. We are talking about people having the proper clothing. That's a wraparound service. We're talking about people having something to eat, right? And that will get them to actually getting to a job. And so we're trying to get folks to have at the very least, the runway set forth for them so that they can even get to an interview. Fill out a resume, right? I don't want to numb the idea by calling it just wraparound services. These are life skill items that are needed in order for people to actually get a even seasonal part-time job. And so the work that we're doing is a significant investment, and we should be putting dollars toward the design of wraparound service funding that is specific to the organizations, whereby they can either submit how they're going to spend it, but there aren't as many boundaries on it because you guys know your people, And so if we can focus there, and my desire, of course, is to take the collaborative model that we have with Lesson and bring that to a larger organization, because then we can turn and say, hey, I'm a Hot Bread Kitchen and I need to get somebody who has, I don't know, direct housing supports, and we can say, okay, go to Goals. Mm-hmm. They already have a connection here. If you have anybody on the Lower East Side, send your folks over there. Mm-hmm. And if they're over here, go over here, right? I want us to be able to really band together and utilize our resources so we're not going after the same contracts for no reason, so that we can figure out a different pathway forward. So I think my recommendation is to look at the equation again, fill in the gaps, and fill it in with flexibility in space and funding, give trust to the organizations that they know how to spend the money that they need based on the people who are around them. You can hold them accountable, but then also kind of untease that word wraparound, that phrase wraparound services, so we can actually see it's tied toward humans.
So let me ask the rest of you, I think first of all, we all know, I think we're all here on this panel, we know that there's a lot of things that we want to see happen in the world of workforce development, things that need to happen to support economic progression, expand pathways to good jobs in the city. And Rachel very eloquently talked about a lot of those things. I think we're trying to make a case with this report that wraparound services are things that are going to kind of help the great folks already doing good workforce development programs to become even more effective, to make sure people can enroll that otherwise maybe aren't, or that are able to stay in those programs, have better outcomes like the data shows. It's only one piece of it we know, but we're not doing enough of this even in New York City. So if we were gonna do more with wraparound services, what's one thing specifically that the new mayor should do?
Sure. I have a few. You asked for one of a few. First of all, I just want to thank and acknowledge Greg Morris for elbowing his way onto that transition committee for the mayor. So first thing, check. I think we need strong advocacy, and I can't think of a better person than Greg to do that, so thank you. I also think we need to shift the conversation a little bit. I think the data will help tremendously. I think this is one of your points, Rachel, that we also need to build these systems around the people who we're trying to serve, and government needs to think about the contracts that they offer based on our experience. Sometimes the city asks, sometimes they require that we listen to our young people, the people that we serve, to build our programs. Then I would flip it back on the government to say, you should listen to the people you entrust with the dollars to create plans to spend that money in a way that is most effective based on the real needs of the people we are trying to serve. Multi-year contracts, flexible spending, money for overhead, and this idea that using this money to honor and celebrate or require collaboration. We all know that disjointed care is never as good as coordinated and integrated care. So if these government dollars promoted that, then we would do more of it.
Let me follow up with that. Is it maybe it would be helpful, maybe not, but can you all think of a particular contract that you think is a good example that kind of grasps or kind of includes some of the things that you just talked about, that maybe we can kind of take to this new administration and say, let's do more. There's a lot of bad things in the contracting process that need to change. Here's a couple maybe we should build on. Is there an agency or is it just we got to start?
It's not the city. I'd say McKinsey Scott money. Because it gives space. Not that the city contracts are not necessary. We need it, but we're in a weird space now where maybe we need to tease out. Perhaps the Procurement Policy Board can meet.
I mean, I'll just, in the government funding there has been openness to adding case management services. It took a whole conversation. This was and a lot of questions about why do you want to do this? So there was openness to it. So, I mean, I think folks we've worked with the city are open to at least the conversation. I mean, I'll just say that would answer to your first, so two things. Number one is this sector just needs more public money. I mean, it's kind of wild how under-resourced workforce development is. And again, I've come from other sectors that this sector needs a lot more money. And it's just wild to me. I mean, this is economic development. This is the lifeblood of New York City. So we just need more money. But I will just say also, just in specific answer to your question, childcare is such a big deal for us, and I know for other folks in the audience. So I am very excited to talk more about universal childcare. I'll just put in a huge plug to anyone who's out there. Flexible hours, late hours. Our members go off to jobs that aren't always 9 to 5 or even not only 9 to 7. And so I'm really, really hoping that whoever policymakers around this are thinking about that too. But we as a group would be an amazing group to work with around childcare because it affects all that we do. And I'll just say that in preparing even for talking today, my team really talked a lot about not only needing the childcare, of course, for when you get the job, frankly, not even needing it for the moment you start training, but you kind of need it like to enroll in our program. We need to know that childcare has started before you enroll. And for anyone who's raised a child, usually you need like a day or two to get your child used to the childcare. I mean, so we kind of need to back it up a little bit and have some flexibility around start dates and tenure of the childcare, et cetera. So this is an awesome group to talk about childcare, I think. And I think that would be an enormous benefit to our sector.
And it comes at a time when there's a lot of conversations happening around childcare.
It's exciting.
Yeah. So Eli, tell us about a couple of the things in the report. And you know, by the way, like I think, you know, there's a lot of complexity here, but I think one of our experiences at the Center for an Urban Future has been that if you can really kind of go from kind of the big picture to the real specific, the kind of specificity, it's helpful for policymakers a lot of times. Give them something they can run with. And what should they run with?
Yeah, 100%. Well, I will say, I think the supports that came up most frequently, and to Rachel's point, that really illustrated the human impact, what's possible when government gets behind making programs work better for people, was childcare, number one, and transportation. You know, these are real costs. I mean, a MetroCard we're talking about, even just for the duration of training, hundreds of dollars. You know, if we want to support somebody for 9 months or a year, you're talking about almost $2,000. These are real costs that get in the way of people being able to, you know, participate in these programs and move through them into jobs. And you know, what I would say, the number one recommendation we have in our report is an Omni card for every New Yorker enrolled in a training program, and make childcare available from day one. You know, and I will say two things about that. One is, I think this is really doable in this moment. You know, while the mayor-elect is working on maybe an $8 or $10 billion budget for universal childcare and potentially phasing it over years, our report argues that the mayor can make childcare free for every New Yorker in a workforce development program in his first 100 days. That's a doable promise. That's something that he can do now. I think that's also a reflection of, to the earlier question about, is there anything that's working? Maybe not so much in government contracts per se, but you know, something that's happened under this administration, the current administration, that's really working, but very little known, is the Promise NYC program. This was an initiative that enables a small number of nonprofit providers to directly enroll participants, members of their communities who are undocumented, in childcare voucher programs. And it's really working. Those small number of providers are able to get those vouchers out immediately to folks that otherwise would not be eligible, in large part because of federal restrictions on where those dollars can go. That's a model that we should expand, and my connection there is what works about Promise NYC is it trusts providers to make those determinations. It says, hey, rather than running all of this through government, let you do it, you know, and you get those dollars out to your participants right away. So one of our recommendations is if we want to get childcare, make childcare accessible to folks in workforce training programs from the beginning, use that Promise NYC model. Allow providers to actually make that determination, and they get those vouchers out to their participants right away. And to Leslie's point, we heard multiple examples of folks, even when ACS was accepting new voucher applications, which paused again. But even when they're accepting those applications, the determination process could take, you know, 3 months or longer. Well, by the time you actually figure out whether you're eligible for a voucher, the program's over. And like it is not, if you're a single parent, you may not have ever even signed up. You may not have even shown up for day one, you know? So to me, that's one of those kind of immediate steps that the next mayor can take. And I say the same about Omni cards. You know, that's a support that puts dollars back in folks' pockets right away. That's something that the city can do on its own, that's been proven through the model of CUNY ASAP and now CUNY ACE. And that could be effective in the first 100 days. You know, the one other thing, two other quick things I'll mention about recommendations. You know, I think one is there are a couple of other things that are working, but that aren't working for enough providers. One of those things is the Work Progress Program. You know, these are dollars that the city makes available for wages for internships, paid internships, but only for young adults. It's a good program. It's one of the very few mechanisms that the city has available to actually subsidize the cost of learning in a work setting. But it's only available to youth who are 16 to 24. And as NYC ETC's reports have also shown, most of the dollars in our system are going to younger participants. So we definitely saw a big gap there. If you're a provider that focuses on working age adults or adults, you know, over the age of 25, there are almost no public dollars available to support stipends or to subsidize wages. That's a step that the city could take immediately and say, hey, we really appreciate the benefits of that WPP program. Let's make it available to providers that serve people over the age of 24 as well. And then the last thing I'll mention is, we really saw in the report the value of those navigators, that navigator role. But what we also saw is that for many organizations, that navigator or caseworker has a just unsustainable caseload. We're talking about 150 or 200 or more members for every one person in that role. In some organizations, there's even fewer. And to Rachel's point, we're talking about the staff that are really responsible for meeting the very real and specific needs of those members, those specific individuals, but that it can also help folks navigate to supports and services wherever they exist. So I think one of my other takeaways was not every provider needs to provide all of these services in-house, but what the city I think has really failed to do is create either contracts or collaboratives or mechanisms that enable providers to direct their members to where they can receive that support from a really qualified, competent organization. Now, that could be done through contracting that incentivizes partnerships, that has structured dollars for wraparound services for one provider and for employment-based outcomes and other things for another provider. But it could also be done by expanding the number of navigators that we have in our system. We recommend one small but potentially really meaningful step would be to expand a small but great program at CUNY that has actually a navigator core, but that does not typically work with workforce development organizations. They're really good at what they do. They train folks at CUNY to function in that role in other human services settings, but they've never been part of the workforce sector. That could change if the city got behind an investment there.
Thanks, Eli. Just quickly, if anybody wants to check out the report that Eli had a big hand in writing and editing and coming up with the ideas for, it's at nycfuture.org. Also, a big shout out to New York City workforce funders for making it possible. So we got a few minutes left, and I think Eli's, we're talking about childcare. The mayor's talking a lot about universal childcare. Eli mentioned Omni cards to workforce training participants. The mayor-elect is talking a lot about free buses, so making buses and transportation more affordable. So in the last couple minutes, just curious, are these the things that we should start with? If not, what's one thing where you would say to the mayor-elect, hey, let's put this on the table, let's do this in the first few months?
Something that I would say to add is attention and resources to the workforce itself. This is a workforce conference, and we need to think about the people who we are asking to do this work, whether it's paying them more, increasing their contracts, or how about simply paying organizations.
Are you saying, hey, the mayor is talking at this kind of really big level about these incredibly important affordability issues, but let's not forget, kind of making the affordability issues for people in the workforce. Great.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm just going to shout out, again, the work that NYC ETC does. There's so many of us in this room that are part of the organization and really supporting this sector. And I would just personally love to see more attention paid to this sector in the coming year by the current administration. Haven't quite seen enough conversation about that, so I'd love to see that as really a driver of economic development in New York City. I am really still excited about childcare, though, and I put forth all of us to have conversations about childcare and how it can really help working New Yorkers with the administration.
Great.
Yeah.
Rachel, you have the last word.
Okay. We can all agree that living in New York is really hard. And the people who are our members or who receive services from us, it's not their fault. And if we can change the narrative around who receives services, as I mentioned at the top, everybody does. If you use a library card, that's social service. If you use a road, that's social service. And so we all receive benefits from being a part of this society. And if we can be honest that it is really hard to go from one training to another, it's hard to live here without any income. It's hard to do multiple things. Childcare is away from you. You have to get on a train to get from here to there. It is exhausting. And so if we can change the narrative around who we're helping and take away the stigma of help and instead find a way to address the systemic issue that we are also all caught up in, then perhaps some actual change is made.
All right. Well, thank you all, and please join me in thanking this great panel.